Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us on the show today from Decatur, Texas, Dean Ferris. Dean, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Oh, it's great to have you on. Been looking forward to recording with you and getting to learn a lot more about your Oregon joint line. Be honest, you're the first N-scaler on the show, so I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about N-scale and maybe some of the pros and cons and the challenges you faced and how you've overcome them and built a fantastic layout.
Well, we'll try to get everybody converted by the end of this.
Okay, so we're all going to be putting our HO stuff up on eBay, and it's all going to be N-scale. So,
or maybe you'll convert me. I don't know.
I don't know. Well, yeah, maybe. Or maybe we'll just land right back in the middle like where we are right now. But I'll tell you, in the pre-show research, and obviously I pulled out the October 2021 issue of Railroad Model Craftsman, and I suggest anybody who hasn't seen this issue from a little over a year ago to see if they can get their hands on this issue and take a look at all the photos and read the article. It's really fantastic, and we're going to cover some of the material that was covered in the article, but definitely worth going back over. First thing I want to start with is where I normally start with everybody. How did you get into the hobby?
Well, some of my very earliest memories are of trains, and I grew up out in the coast of Washington State, and our house was along the Northern Pacific Moclips branch, and it was your classic 3-day-a-week local, 10 mile per hour. There was a crossing about a half mile from our house, and we'd hear the train blow for that crossing, and my brother and I would immediately run down to the tracks, and the engineer and the conductor knew us well. That the conductor would always come out in the back platform and wave to us and yell at us, and he'd hit a little horn he tooted, and it was just great memories of that. And it was, I think, a 3-day-a-week local. It was just enough frequency that it was an event rather than a main line where it's just, train after train. On the 3-day-a-week, if you miss Friday's train, then you wouldn't see another train till Saturday. So you better make sure you get out there for Friday's train.
Right.
And so that was really good. And just so I can kind of clear up, might be able to clear up a bit of mystery for some of your listeners here. So that the branch line, when we were young, a typical train was 10 to 15 cars. And by the time they abandoned it in 83, there was only one customer left. And that was Aloha Shake. And Aloha Shake, Atlas has come out with boxcars for Aloha Shake and N-scale, and I think HO as well. And it's got the little hula dancer with a palm tree behind logo, and it's always fun when I go to train shows and people spot those cars, and it's Aloha Shake, is that some kind of a seasonal ice cream drink from McDonald's? And it was a cedar shake mill for roofing. Okay. And so that was the only kind of car we ever saw there at the end, which is pretty cool.
That is kind of neat when they come out with a car that you've seen before, and it's pretty wild when that happens.
Yeah, I think, I grew up in a town called Hoquiam, Washington, and I think there's been 3 different cars made that actually, there were Hoquiam plywood, there was Evans plywood, and another car, the Aloha Shake, that had returned to Hoquiam on the stenciling, and 2 out of the 3 misspelled Hoquiam. So, yeah. We had my brother Brian is 3 years older than me, and we had an older cousin who's about 20 years older, and he ended up going off to Vietnam, and he had a Lionel train set, pretty elaborate train set for a kid, and his parents wanted it out of their house when he left, and so my dad ended up taking that layout, and so from the time I was as long as my memories go, we had that layout, a Lionel layout. Which is pretty cool. My brother and I loved it. And then, we'd go on, our family would take big driving trips every summer. And, our focus was just glued to the tracks. And anywhere we were along the tracks, my brother and I just focused on those tracks, and anytime we saw a train, we get so excited. And so I think my parents knew that the train thing wasn't going to go away anytime soon, which it hasn't for either of us.
Right.
And so when Brian turned 8, my brother Brian, he got a Tyco layout for Christmas, or a train set. And then I got one a couple of years later when I was 7. Okay. And I still remember it was from J.C. Penney's, and it had a white 40-foot J.C. Penney boxcar. And I knew that wasn't right. So I actually took my watercolor set that I used for art projects, and I remember trying to paint it brown, and you can imagine how well that worked out. But I
was probably still better than it's probably still better than the J.C. Penney car.
Yeah, exactly. I wish I still had that car. It'd be pretty funny. So I had a 4x8 layout in my room, and my brother had his layout as well. And I modeled Burlington Northern and Santa Fe, sectional trap, typical, kid layout, I guess. And in our mid-teens, Brian and I decided to join forces, and we got Model Railroader and RMC, and we were starting to see, how the hobby was going. And it was, they're going away from the middle of the room 4x8 sheet of plywood island to the around the walls, open grid bench work, staging tracks, walk around throttles, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so we went ahead and tore down both our layouts and then started a new layout. And it was pretty good little layout. It had, I think, an 18 track yard, believe it or not, which most of the tracks were pretty short because they were stub end, but it had, a good twice around the room mainline run with 2 full length passing sidings. It had 2 hidden staging tracks, and then I found a circuit for a walk around throttle in Model Railroader, and I actually built that throttle with my dad's help. So we actually had a home built walk around throttle that worked pretty good.
Nice.
But the problem with that is, I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this. About the time that you're getting into your adolescent years, and you're about the time you have reasonable carpentry, electrical skills, and everything else to really, build a reasonable layout, is about the time you're leaving home. Yep. And that's definitely what happened to us. We didn't get to, the layout had all the track down and everything, and we'd had some operations, but it wasn't long before we were moving out of the house, and that layout was abandoned.
So where was it located in your parents' house?
Yeah, so we actually had a spare room. So there was just Brian and I were just two kids, and we had upstairs was all ours, and we just had a spare room for it. I think it was probably, I don't know, 14 by 14, something like that. So pretty good sized room. Mm-hmm. Just happened to have it, and my parents were happy to see us, develop the layout. And as always, my dad wasn't a modeler, but he was very much a tinkerer. He's into electronics and radio. He's a ham radio operator, so he was always very supportive of what we were doing.
Well, that's certainly super that, parents that are allowing, a little bit of room to get into this, and hopefully seeing the value, and as we hope many others do, of the hobby and the massive amount of skills that you can build participating in it.
Yeah, exactly. But even then, the layouts at that time, I was being influenced by, people like Bruce Chubbs with the Sunset Valley, and, Tony Custer and Alan McClellan with their layouts. And I was always drawn to the big layouts and just the full transportation system, not just, one portion of it, but just, moving tonnage over distances. And so even as an early adult, I was always thinking, the day will come when I will build a large layout. And of course, as a young adult, you don't have anywhere near the resources to accomplish that. But I certainly kept it in mind. And I moved to Seattle in 1983 to go to college. And there was a Interbay Yard. There was kind of a place where there was a main yard in town, and there was kind of a place where rail fans hang out. And I met a guy named Phil Newbold there, and we became close friends. In fact, we're still close friends. And him and I began exploring all over. And in a weekend, we would go to Northern California or Eastern Oregon or Western Montana or Southern British Columbia and camp out trackside and just explore and rail fan all over the region, and especially railroads and mountains. I was very, very much drawn to that. And so I got a very good idea of what I liked. And specifically, it was the Intermountain West that I was drawn to. West of the Cascades in Washington State is very wet. Wall of trees on both sides of the track. But you get east of the mountains and it's wide open spaces and huge vistas. And, I always loved the look of that. So as part of our railfan trips, we'd often go to train shows, and Phil somehow had become an N-scale collector, and he's still an N-scale collector. He's never had a layout, but I started to see some of the stuff that he was buying. And, I'd had friends as kids that had, the Aurora postage stamp trains and just had those huge Rapido couplers, and you wouldn't stay on the track, and just, really crude details. And so I was very surprised. The stuff that Phil was buying was the highly detailed microtrains cars. And, Kato was starting to come out with, or I should say Atlas was coming out with Kato produced locomotives that ran great for N-scale. And then, shortly thereafter, Atlas came out with a Code 55 track. And so I really started to take a look at N-scale and ended up selling what little HO stuff I had at that point, and fully started collecting N-scale at that point.
Yeah, so it was your friend's influence there. You get to see some of the N-scale stuff that was coming out, and I guess that's one thing that's that bounced around. And I guess from the guy, I'm an HO guy, and you see N and you just see all the possibilities of N, just in how much more you can just double, triple, quadruple. I don't even know what the number would be to a layout of HO versus N. But I think one of the big, I don't know if it's a misunderstanding of N versus HO is availability of product, but that seems to be correcting itself over the years.
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, we still very much have, HO envy when it comes to product and supply. I mean, you have so many more manufacturers, and, for those of us that kind of follow product releases, and we see what Athearn releases every month, and it'll be, 15 HO products and 2 N-scale products. So it's a little bit frustrating, but most of the stuff, of course, is single run. They don't, there's not stuff that's just available on the shelves permanently. So if if you see it, buy it now, because it might be gone and it ain't coming back. So
yeah.
So once I started with the N-scale, I started collecting, and Phil ended up hiring out with the railroad as a conductor. And I actually followed him a couple of years later in late '94 as a conductor. And about that time, my wife and I decided to have a house built, and I had I ended up designing the house, and of course it had to have a train room. So I put it was about a 14 by 20 train room, I think. Okay. And I was looking at, what I should do for a prototype. And originally I was thinking a freelance line, and the line I came up with was the Pacific Northern, and it went down from Washington State down through the middle of Oregon and eventually connected with the California roads. But the thought of painting all those N-scale engines in a freelance scheme kind of put the kibosh on that. And so I ended up going with my hometown railroad of the Northern Pacific. And because I liked the Great Northern as well, they got trackage rights. And so that first layout was kind of the infancy of the Oregon Joint Line. And, unfortunately, I think I made every mistake possible in track planning that layout. I took, some of my huge layout designs that I'd had back in my early 20s and tried to squeeze it into that room. And, it was just a huge spaghetti bowl with, multiple Tehachapi loops. And, the track could pop into out of sight, and who knows where it's going to pop back out, and that sort of thing. And who would have known that you need more than 3 inches of vertical clearance over a staging yard? You kind of learn those things pretty quick. And so I was able to make just about every mistake possible. But it actually did get to a point where I had all the track down, and it wasn't an operational layout. But then my railroad career has started to taken off, and I'd been promoted to yard master pretty quickly. And then I got promoted to train master, and then they were starting to talk to me about further promotions. And I'd seen other guys I'd known go that route, and they'd gone and become the terminal manager in Wilmer, Minnesota. And then 2 years later, they became the superintendent of operations at Belen, New Mexico. It's just a very much, moving from town to town to town. My kids were just entering school age, and so I didn't want to do that. So I decided I'm just going to move to corporate headquarters to try to get a corporate job and just try to finish out my career there. And so that's what I did. I got a job in finance in 2005 and moved to Texas. And at that point, I knew I was ready for my ultimate layout. I had the prototype experience. I had the experience of Oregon Joint Line 1, which with all its mistakes, and then, of course, the railfan experience I had out there with Phil camping trackside in western Montana and eastern Oregon and everything. And so we searched for a long time. Texas, I think some of your other guests have talked about this, but Texas does not have basements, at least North Texas. And so we spent a long time looking for a house and finally found one, 28 by 28 foot layout room over the garage, full height ceilings all the way around. Only entrance was through the garage, so no modeling buddies traipsing through the house. And then it had its own bathroom too. So pretty ideal.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah. So we bought that in 2005, and I think I spent about a year planning and then commenced construction in late 2006.
I'm just picturing your wife goes in and, there's a nice living room and the master bedroom's nice, and maybe she falls in love with the kitchen, but there's no railroad space. I mean, how did that go? I mean, I guess I can just imagine with my spouse, going to a house and looking just for, and I guess when I was looking for this house here, I was kind of in that mindset too. Like, I'm looking for a train space, and then she's got her own mindsets and just trying to get that two to coordinate. How well did that work for you?
Well, I'm both lucky and unlucky, as my wife has horses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so well, some people might look at me and think, "Wow, lucky guy, his wife is putting up with this." Well, I'm putting up with her thing too. I mean, so what came with this house that had the great layout room was 12 acres of pasture that needed to be fenced, and a barn that needed to be built, and horses that need to be moved from Washington State down to Texas. So I made the bigger sacrifice as part of this deal.
Your hobby doesn't need to be fed 3 times a day.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yep. So, when I moved down, I really didn't know. Well, I knew a few people because the dispatchers had moved down from Seattle when they closed the dispatching office down to Fort Worth. So I knew a few people that kind of modeled somewhat, but I really wasn't part of the crowd. And so I really ended up, for the most part, building the layout by myself. And that's everything. That's the bench work and the track and the roadbed and the backdrops and all the electrical and the scenery and the whole works, which is, I know that, like aisles don't necessarily scale from HO to N the same way, but you think about a 28 by 28 foot layout. I mean, what's the HO equivalent of that? 50 by 50? I mean, how many guys do you know that built a layout that big by themselves?
Right.
And it took a while, but I was, after about 5 years, I had all the track down, and And I'm starting to beat modelers in the area, and I think that 2012 was my first op session I had.
We'll go back to the planning part of it. You got this room now, and you mentioned that the first version of the layout, you had made some mistakes and some things that you would do different. What was the difference between, say, the first one and then the planning that went into the second one?
Yeah, so it was very much just, what's the term they use? Sincere. I mean, it's the train never passes through the main line never passes through the same scene more than once. You follow your train from one end to the other without really, recrossing yourself. And of course, I had a lot more room. Now, the thing that kind of happened that sort of threw things off was I had a rock band I was playing in, and originally I put a big chunk of the layout room, probably a quarter of it, is where our band practiced.
Okay.
And so I had the lower level was all staging, and then there's a helix to go up to the upper level, and it was that helix. I quite frankly didn't do a very good job on it, and I think it's probably about early 2007, I guess. The band broke up and the helix got ripped out, and what replaced it was the peninsula that allows the climb from the staging level up to the main level, which is good. It got rid of the helix and everything, but what that did was to move the kind of the terminal area to the middle of the layout, whereas typically you'd want it. It's better to have it on the ends of the layout with the main line running in between. So if I'd had to do it over again, I might have done that differently, but I wasn't sure exactly how things would pan out, and didn't anticipate that layout space would become available like it did.
So what does that set you up for, though, when you have that terminal does that give you options to go both east and west out of that with operations?
It does, but that's a problem. So, I don't have signals or anything, and so we've been trying to go to timetable and train order. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is, trains go into the terminal, into the yards to work, to pick up and set out, and then, that's kind of a gray area for the dispatcher. He doesn't know, how long those trains are going to be in that terminal area. And so the variability of that timing, by the time they come out, he's got to write the train orders for, much earlier in the session to try to predict that variability of timing of how long those trains are going to work in the session to keep things moving. And it's almost impossible, mid-run to actually write new train orders in the terminal area to kind of reflect how things are going. So it's a lot easier. When you think about people like Tony Coaster and others who have a timetable and train order operation, it's a lot easier to have, the terminals on both ends, and then all just mainline running in between with multiple sidings, and a lot easier for the dispatcher to a lot more predictability and timing, so the dispatcher can write orders and set up meets and such.
As we're talking about the timetable, you've actually done like a hybrid version of that. Explain that timetable and track warrant theory that you've come up with.
Well, I think we're actually going away from that, but basically,
okay. But let's talk about it. You've done it. Let's talk about that, and then talk about why you're going away from it.
Yeah. So I'd gone track warrant, and that works pretty good. But the problem with it just got to be so routine, and the every time we've run a lot of helpers and a fair amount of traffic, and the track warrants to hand those out are, you kind of have to get in line with the dispatcher to get your turn to get a track warrant, which is okay for some of the traffic, but I've got passenger trains running across a layout. So it was a little frustrating that, okay, we're going to stop the passenger train. He's going to pick up the phone and try to call the dispatcher. but he may not get through the first try. So he's just going to sit there and keep trying and trying until he gets his turn to get a track warrant so he can move on to the next meet. And so it really wasn't, it didn't feel like, we were giving the appropriate priority to higher, passenger or higher priority to freights. And so what we came up with was, maybe we can have those passenger trains run on a timetable schedule, just like a timetable and train order would do. And then, he doesn't need to get a track warrant. He just runs on the schedule. And then when he OS's out of the additional terminal, when he tells the dispatcher when he's left, he would tell the dispatcher, okay, we're departing GN Junction 20 minutes late. And then you have to stay at least 20 minutes late across the entire layout. And so when people are getting track warrants to meet him, if it's part of that track warrant, it would say, train number 4 is 20 minutes late. And so they knew they could, they would be able to count on that and not have to worry about running head on to the passenger train based on his schedule.
Right.
So it's probably made it more complicated than it actually is, but it was kind of a hybrid, and it works pretty well. But for the upcoming NMRA convention, I really want to go to an actual system, not just a hybrid, thing that makes it work just for convenience, but an actual system that was in use. And in 1969, which is my era, that's what they used in non-signal territory was timetable and train order. And so we're really got to make it work. And I'm fortunate I've got a guy, Matt Sugarman, who's a dispatcher where I work. And he is really made it a hobby, I guess, of dispatching timetable and train order layouts. He's done like the San Diego layout, the Big Tehachapi layout. And so he's been very helpful in getting this set up, and we're pretty committed to going full timetable and train order in the future here.
Yeah, I know that I've operated timetable once, and it certainly looked like I had never run it before when I was doing it. So how does it convey to your operators? I mean, do you I think you got a pretty good operating group. How did they pick up on it? Is that something they were accustomed to doing when they started operating with you, or is it something you had to teach and kind of learning curve along the way?
Well, so we've only actually had 2 sessions so far, but it's actually gone pretty well. So on my crew, there are several actual dispatchers, prototype dispatchers, and those guys, even if they didn't dispatch prototypically in the timetable and train order era, they're still very aware of how it was done, and it certainly have an interest. And then I've got other railroad retirees that are part of my operating crew that have been around in the timetable and train order era. So especially the first session, I was shocked at how well it went. I mean, the guys picked up on it pretty quick, and there's, we certainly cut people slack. I mean, first session you have to, but it really went well. Other than the problem I described with the terminal being in the middle of the layout, but as far as the guys picking up on it, it really worked out good.
Where did you get your information from? I mean, were you operating other layouts and seeing this in the works as you were building yours, or how did you become involved or get an understanding of it?
I wouldn't say my understanding is great on it yet. I've got several books that I've tried to read through, and of course, that it's great material to read at bedtime if you want to get a good sleep. Timetable and train order rules. Yeah. But I've been to several operating events, Kansas City and Denver and Houston and Minneapolis, and managed to operate on several timetable and train order operations. And my brother my brother back in Washington, he still has an operating HO layout, and he's been timetabled and train order for several years. And so I've, when I get a chance, I operate on his layout too. So I'd gotten some experience there.
Excellent. I know there's a book that I've talked about too, that I've picked up, and I've got it here somewhere. It's such a big book, but the opposite came out with a book quite a few years ago. And I say it's a great book, except for it's so big. Like, that's my only complaint. Like, it's like I tried to lay down on the couch and try to read it, but you end up dropping it on your head and getting yourself hurt because it's like a hardcover. It's a beautiful book, and there's so much great information for those that are, thinking about operating and want to talk about the methods of operating. But I just wish they'd put it in a paperback. Would be perfect. If they could condense it down to a paperback, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think you're probably referring to the compendium.
I am. You know exactly what book. I'm adjusting around here in the studio trying to find it.
Yeah, no, I have that book. In fact, it's on my nightstand right now.
Yes, it's a compendium of model railroad operations, and OpSig put that out. It's a beautiful book. Like I said, it's probably worth its weight, pun intended.
Yes. Yeah, it's I refer to that quite often.
Excellent. So your brother stayed in the hobby. You mentioned he's got an HO scale layout. And does he get down to yours and get to run and see your end scale and what you're up to?
He's not been down here for a few years now, and I don't think he's ever been to a session, but he retired last year, so he's planning on coming down this spring, and he keeps asking me, when's a good time for him to come down for a session, because he's very excited to come down and see what's been done with layout and get to know my operating crew.
Does he ever wonder why or what happened to you and ended up going from HO to N? Does he ever question the process there?
Well, I think he's probably wondering how I was able to come up with the layout that I have, because traditionally back in the day, his modeling skills were far exceeded mine, and at this point, I think we're pretty comparable. I think my layout's certainly a larger scale than what he's got, but he's probably wondering how I was able to come up with a layout that I have.
Yeah, that's for you've got quite a bit. I'm hoping we can get we'll get the track plan shared up on the Facebook page so that people can see this as well, because it's quite a track plan, and you've got some beautiful scenes. We'll try to get some of these pictures out, but definitely, again, if you're out there and you can get your hands on the October 2021 RMC, get your hands on that, because it's a beautiful, well done. Let's talk about the article for a second. So what got you to put this together to submit to RMC?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the RMC, actually, as a kid, our local public library carried RMC, and so my brother and I that's how we got to read RMC, was we checked out the library. And of course, I never thought that the day would come when I'd ever, be able to create something that would be worthy of it. But there's a guy named Justin France, who is, I think he's an associate editor.
That's exactly who he is. Yep.
Yeah. He's part of my my Oregon Joint Line Facebook group, and so he reached out to me and asked me if I'd interested in doing an article.
Well, that's great. So what was the process for you? Have you written before? Have you done anything like this before, or was this like all brand new to you?
I've been in there's a local publication, the Cowcatcher, that my friend Tim Blackwell produces, and it's a regional publication that's based in Texas, but he's slowly, increasing it to be over the entire Midwest area. And so he had me in feature cover story back in, I think, 2013. But I've often, I don't know that I've had anything for publication before of this scale, but I've always been a guy who's interested in writing, and I was proud that I submitted the layouts or the article to them. And pretty much they left it untouched. They really didn't do much editing at all. So
Yeah, well, it was very well written, and then the photography, you've done an excellent job with that because you provided all the photos. Let's talk a little bit about that. What was your process for getting the photos done?
Yeah, so I mean, those are actually all iPhone photos. But I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but I used Helicon, the focus stacking software. And so, I've heard people say, well, you can't do that with an iPhone, but basically, you put it on a tripod and set your scene and then just press different areas around the screen to zoom the focus in and out and, take, I don't know, probably 12 different photos. And then you go out to the Helicon software that just, immediately takes all the best parts of each photo, the in focus parts to give you the depth of field that just, it really, it's amazing that the technology of that, because I think back on my 35 millimeter camera back with, prior layout, trying to photograph and look at those pictures now, and the depth of field is horrible compared to what we can do today. So it's really a fortunate thing. And then my layout is kind of based on, it's kind of set up for those big scenes where you can see the entire train, the Intermountain West, where there's not a lot of trees in the way. And if you're standing on a hill, you can see the entire train stretched out before you. And so having the focus stacking photography is just, it really is a great thing for a layout like mine. So it really allows you to explore different angles and such.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen one of these photos where you see a lot of the train coming around the corner. You have it titled NP at Picture Gorge, and it says southbound Northern Pacific Train 655, Pasco, Washington to Stockton, California, stretches out over the entire length of Picture Gorge. The double-sided canyon is a signature scene on the Oregon Joint Line. That's just a beautiful photo and beautiful modeling. Just this is really fantastic. Talk about some of your process and some of the things that you've been inspired when you go to make a scene like this. How does this all develop for you?
Yeah, I think it's probably like a lot of people where you have a picture in your mind of what you want, but you don't know how you're going to get there. And my prototype, I think, is unique enough. I mean, I'm modeling an area where there is no railroad. So, I knew, if you're going to model Central Oregon, you have the geology of Central Oregon is all these ancient lava flows, just flooded the area over and over again. It created these layers of basalt. And then when rivers cut their channels down through the basalt, it created these canyons. And so that's just a signature feature. If you go down to the Columbia River Gorge or the Oregon Trunk, you see those basalt canyons. And so I knew I had to figure out a way to do that. And I'd seen a lot of people say, well, you can use a casting or a lot of different things, and I was never really totally sold on what I saw from other people. And so I just really started experimenting, and ultimately I figured out a way. I just started stacking layers of the pink, I think it's DuPont foam. Unfortunately, in Texas, you can only buy a 1-inch foam. Back up in the Northeast, you guys can probably get the 4-inch stuff, which I'd love to have. But
for some reason we need more insulation up here, and we could compare temperatures, but I'm sure there's a difference for sure. So
well, we need insulation for the opposite reason.
Right. True.
But yeah, so it just ended up stacking the foam and and gluing it together and then basically taking a hacksaw blade without a frame, so you can kind of bend it and sawing out the rough shapes. And then the rest of it was just all just, fine detailed carving with an X-Acto knife, which, you see that picture of gorge scene. And it's a double-sided canyon that's, probably 6 feet long of all that basalt rock. That took a while, but once I did some mock-ups and got to the point where I felt comfortable with the process, then there was no way I wasn't going to do that. I knew I had it, and I knew I could apply it to as big a scene as I wanted. And so that really has turned out great. And I get a lot of people, reaching out and, how did you do that? And on my Facebook group, especially, and how did you do that? And I always, it's kind of a smart ass answer, but I always just post a picture of, here's the tools used in the construction of this canyon. It's the hacksaw blade and an X-Acto knife. Yeah. That's how you did this.
Right. And this layout, is this the first one you've actually gotten to the level of scenery with? The other ones, you said you laid some track down. This is your first pass at scenery?
Pretty much, yeah. And, it's a big enough layout. If you look at the first scenes that went in, they're not completely up to snuff with my current skill level, but they're still pretty passable. And it's just, I think so much of it is just a matter of, spending so much time trackside and knowing, what it should look like, and not knowing how to get there, but by gosh, I'm going to figure it out. And then I was going to in my current position for the last, 15 years, I've had, I go out with the engineering team and inspect short line leases. And when you do that, you really get to know the elements of a railroad. And, it's always interesting to see where they're going to stop along the right of way, and where there's trouble spots, where there's, maybe there's a slide that's happening slowly over time, or, bridge issues, or you name it. Soft track is the worst typically, but you really, when you break it down, hanging out with a railroad, civil engineer, you really get to know the components of what makes up roadbed and track and drainage issues. And in particular, I noticed that, on railroads, we love bridges as model railroaders, of course, but in reality, they're far more culverts than bridges. Probably, I don't know, ratio of 10-1 culverts versus bridges. And so that's, I certainly have a couple bridges on my layout, but most of my water crossings are culverts. And it's, goes back to the cut and fill associated with culverts. I think, to me, that's just as spectacular, or it can be just as spectacular as a major bridge, having those cuts and fills.
I can just imagine. I know I had an issue when I was out on the road traveling in a non-railroad job, but I would see railroads all over, and of course I made sure I found them too. And then you'd see some stuff, and you get this great idea, and you just can't wait to get home and apply it to the layout. I'm sure you've come upon that at least a few times.
Yeah, well, especially I've over the last several years, back in my rail fanning years with Phil, I'd taken a ton of slides, and so I've been going through those slides and scanning them and just really looking at those and thinking, wow, what an amazing scene this is, the Union Pacific up in the Blue Mountains of Eastern Oregon. That's what I want. That's what I want on the layout. So it's, plenty of inspiration from the real thing.
For sure.
And just, making sure as I'm planning scenes that, I've got pictures of the real thing, hanging next to the scenes, and not just, imagining what it looks like in my head, but actually having examples that I can point at and right in front of me. That certainly helps.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm like you said, being able to apply what you've learned in the field, and whether you're rail fanning or your job, and being able to take it back, because the trains may have changed, between, the era that you're modeling in now, but topography doesn't really change. The earth and the way it's shaped and the things you get to see and out in the field certainly is a great piece to bring back with you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I realize I'm in kind of a unique position that most modelers, don't have access to with all the operations and everything else in my prototype experience. But there's plenty that I can share, and I still, I certainly don't know everything, and I certainly get a lot of influences from friends that aren't prototype railroaders.
Yeah, so let's talk about the friends here, because I knew we were talking before the show about the kind of the connection here that's been happening between around the layout and some of the guys in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We start with Chris Atkins, and we kind of tie some strings together. So you got a quite a good group down there in that Dallas-Fort Worth area that you've been able to connect with.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. When I first moved down, I didn't really know any modelers. And eventually I started to meet a few modelers, and, most of them were retirees. And of course my layout it's a ways out from being completed at that point. And I'm, you're kind of thinking, well, it's great that I've met these guys, but 10 years from now, are they, are these guys still going to be able to make it up the stairs? And it's an unfortunate thing, but that's kind of the reality.
You definitely have to consider. I know our group does the same thing. You're thinking about the access to your layout, and none of us are getting any younger, so it's certainly on our minds.
Yeah, and so I went up to. I decided to go up to Tulsa. So Tulsa area has a big layout operations weekend every March. And so I went up to that, and I was sitting there. I didn't know anybody, but I just went ahead and went up there, and I was sitting there. They have presentations all day Saturday from well-known modelers like Tony Custer, guys like that.
Yep.
And so I was sitting there in my chair, and I look over, and this guy's sitting just across from me. He's got a Northern Pacific hat on. It's like, wow, a Northern Pacific modeler here in Tulsa. And so I started talking to him, and it was Chris Atkins. So That's how I met Chris Atkins. Even though he's the closest modeler in my group to me, I met him in Tulsa. And of course, he was pretty well connected. So I met a lot of guys through him. And then this out of the blue, this guy at work approached me, and he's like, hey, yeah, I hear you got a layout, and yeah, I've got a layout too, and we should get together. Well, his name was Greg McComas, and so he's such a great guy, and he's so enthusiastic and high energy, as you can probably tell from your interview with him.
For sure.
And so he's really become I guess my primary collaborator in terms of bouncing ideas off each other. He's painted some equipment for me. And of course he's all HO, but he's when we operate, he's typically, he's the assistant terminal superintendent, or I guess superintendent operations. So he's kind of the second-hand guy when we do operations. But it's great to, he's fairly young, and then Chris Palmieri, he's operated with me a few times as well. So we've got a pretty good group. I had a guy named Speed, who you may or may not know, but he's a very technical guy, and I think he's a technical director from the NMRA. But he's a very interesting guy. As part of our crowd, he's Dutch Namibian, so he grew up in Africa on a cattle ranch in Africa, and ended up going to Harvard and getting, I think, electrical engineering master's degree, and then ended up in the DFW area, which is great for us because he's like the king of problem solving when it comes to any kind of electrical issue on the layout or DCC, and very, very creative and very helpful guy to have.
Yeah, it's great to have those guys, and we've talked about it in other episodes and mentioned again, it's always good to have that group where you just find out that everybody's got something to offer, a special talent or a niche talent that just all brings the group together and certainly helps everybody.
Yeah, and it's just a real fun group too. I'm very blessed that the guys I have, I mean, we just, I guess some might say we're fairly intense about the layout. I mean, it is, timetable of train order, and we've run a lot of traffic, and there's a lot of yard jobs, but we have a lot of laughing over the course of a session, and certainly laugh at our mistakes, and just we really enjoy each other. So it's been great finding those guys.
Yeah, and those guys are like yourself are all going to be participating in the 2023 Texas Express NMRA National Convention. So you got that coming up in August. What are your plans around the National Convention?
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting. I think I'm definitely going to be on layout tours, and we'll do some op sessions too. I don't think it's been determined exactly a schedule, or I suspect they're going to try to get me to do more op sessions than I want to do, but we'll see. I can take about anywhere from 10 to 15 guys, so I can really absorb a lot of guys in my op sessions. So that'll be good.
That'll make you very popular, Dean. When you can hold a lot of guys, that definitely makes you popular. Is there any projects that you have in mind that you want to get done before August? Do you have kind of a, a checklist? How long is it getting? It's
I think 80 something items, and it's everything from, weather the building to, build a downtown scene. So we'll see how much we'll actually get done. I think I came up with a list back in midsummer, and I think I've got like 20 of the items already crossed off the list. So I think I'm pretty good progress. The problem is, and I'm sure people can relate to this, for me, I'm either in construction mode or I'm in layout operations mode. And so, it's tough to get the layout presentable for operations if you're, if the dust is flying or the sawdust is flying.
Right.
So it's at this point, at some point I've got to start doing tune-up sessions in preparation for that NMRA event. So probably this spring it'll be, hopefully I'll be able to do 5 or 6 sessions at least once a month to get ready for that.
Yeah, that's definitely I'm definitely looking forward to being down in Texas in August. Not quite sure about the heat and doing some rail fanning. I think that'll be very early in the morning and then knocking off by 9:30, 10 o'clock. I think I'll be back in the car or sitting there with the AC going, waiting for trains, I guess. But definitely looking forward to that big event down in Texas. Before we end the show, I definitely want to cover one topic that was I caught interest as I was doing research on you in some pre-show notes, is your YouTube channel. And you've done an outstanding job with that. You've got over 4,000 subscribers on the channel, and the videos are great, and some of them have been a lot of fun, some of your op videos and stuff. So talk about how you got kind of involved with doing some YouTube videos. What drove you towards that?
Yeah, I don't really remember what prompted me to do it, but I just, I did some very simple videos where it was just, here comes a train and watch it go by. And then I wanted to do some operations-based videos, and, with my prototype experience, I mean, you see a lot of operations videos out there on YouTube, and, some of them aren't as, true to the prototype as you might hope. And so I ended up kind of going towards this style of video where I would be they were based around yard operations typically, and I would be kind of the narrator / yard master, and I'd be explaining, what I'm doing as I'm going through a condensed session, and then I'd have all this cast of wacky characters that are kind of floating around, and like the helper engineer that hey, up to Monument Yard, and customers calling out of the blue, or overbearing managers calling in with unreasonable requests. And so it's all kind of this chaos being thrown at the yard master. And most of it, I mean, it's a bit exaggerated, but most of it's based on actual things that I experienced as a yard master.
Well, it certainly sounds like you're having a lot of fun doing the voice acting, and you've got you got all these different characters. You got a Union Pacific crew that complains about long days. You've got quite a bit of things going on in these videos. It's a lot of fun to watch. Yeah, it's pretty well received. It's funny how in the comments on YouTube, I'll get prototype railroaders saying, "Wow, this is exactly what we do in the prototype world." Well, yeah, of course it is, because I was a prototype yard master. But then I'll also get model railroaders trying to tell me that the railroad would never do that. That's not real, or beg to differ on that one. It's definitely is something I experienced, and of course, names are changed to protect the innocent, but there's no shortage of interesting characters on the railroad. That's for sure. And it's such a individual job where crews are largely working independently. They're not sitting in an office with the boss standing right behind them. And so a lot of the individuality, I guess, of people really presents itself over the radio and in person. It sure does. So, I'll tell you, any model railroader that doubts that any of that is, dialogue taken from the prototype, just get yourself a scanner and start listening. I mean, I know a local railroad around here. I was listening to it, and they were giving tax advice over the yard channel. So, should I claim this? Should I claim that? I'm listening to it like, did I get the raw? Nope. That's what they're doing. They're yakking back and forth on the radio, and yeah, it's very realistic. And then the comments and everything else. You've done it's a really cool thing you've done. You've got a lot of subscribers. Some of the videos have got some amazing amount of views, up in the tens of thousands of views too. So that's super cool to see. Yeah,
I think in total, I'm approaching 500,000, which is, I never thought that I would ever get to anything like that, but I certainly have my followers, and the problem with it is it just takes so much time. I mean, you basically write a script and then, film and edit and then do all the voices. I write and perform the music that goes in the background, and,
are you all three parts of the barbershop quartet in the beginning, or is that?
Oh, yeah.
Nice. Look at you.
Yeah, it goes back to my musical days. So
Nice.
I definitely, all the little beats that go by in the background, I've programmed all those. And
nice.
So it's pretty much, one-man show again. But it's really fun to have conversations with myself and play different characters. And, but like I said, just time consuming. I'm actually, you mentioned the UP crew, and I'm actually in the middle of doing a video on the UP Burns local, which has been in heavy request here for a couple of years. People have been asking me to do that. So finally getting around to it. So,
well, it's certainly a talent that you want to touch on. I know, with me and the podcast, and you talk about the videos and stuff that, it's fun. It's still related, but it scratches yet another itch of the things that you like to do and whatnot. Do you find, like, for me, I know my layout suffers for it. Do you find it kind of the layout, kind of taking a back seat to that, or trying to make that balance?
I did find that, and I actually, it's been, a better part of 2 years since I've done one of the full operations videos with the full script and the characters and everything, because it's just so time consuming.
Right. And
certainly coming up to the NMRA convention, I want to get things done on the layout, but I also figured now's a good time to put out some new releases to kind of publicize the layout ahead of the convention.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Well, it certainly got me excited.
I should mention, Ray, by the way, you've got great pipes for the podcast.
Oh, well,
business.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, yeah, it's again, a lot of fun to do, and getting to talk to guys like you, and really kind of the idea of the podcast was, to do that, get to hear everybody's story, and it's just been a lot of fun, and I'm glad you were able to join us tonight and talk about all of what you have going on with your layout. I can't wait to get to Texas and see your layout. I'm hoping I will be there for the national convention in August, but I'm hoping to get down there sooner, but hopefully in the spring where it's a little bit better rail fanning temperatures, and be able to spend some time out on the Fort Worth sub and on the Wichita Falls sub, which seems to be the two places I like to go. Although there is a lot of rail fanning to be done in the DFW area. I think I'm kind of take your pick.
Yeah, there is. I've I don't know. I guess maybe I'm spoiled from living in the Northwest most of my life. Since moving to Texas, I really haven't done a whole lot of rail fanning. There's just no mountains to speak of, at least in the east side of Texas where we are, the north side, which is my favorite thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
I would say when I first moved to Texas, so Decatur is where I live. They actually had a helper district, Decatur Hill, which is kind of crazy. It was like 4 miles of 1.3% grade, and it was just steep enough that coal trains couldn't make it with 3 locomotives. So they had a helper station at Alvord, which is the next town north of Decatur, and they would shove trains up the hill. It's just you don't think of North Texas as being a spot that would have helpers, but they did when I first moved there. It's gone now, but they did.
My first impression, because I had been down to Texas when I was 16, but the railroading wasn't really on the front burner then. But then I went down for the first time, recently, and that's what my impression was. It's like, it's so flat, but yet it isn't. And I think it's the lack of trees or whatever it is. It's just like, it is flat, but it's not completely flat. And there's so much, they talk about the hogbacks that are on the lines, and you can see the train just kind of, up and down, up and down. I've got a couple pictures that are close, not that perfect hogback picture, but it is pretty neat to see. If anybody's going down there, there'll definitely be some good rail fanning. It's just not going to be, it's picturesque in its own way. It certainly isn't the Northwest, that beautiful, like the scene you built or whatnot, but it's definitely something to be seen, because it's just, I think just being able to see so far out is pretty wild.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I actually drive along the Wichita Falls sub as part of my commute, and so I've gotten to know it very well. And Texas, you look on the horizon and it's flat, but between the horizon and where you are, it's up and down, and a lot of cuts and fills and just interesting topography that it's actually I've taken a lot of that away. Just looking at the Wichita Falls sub and applying it towards cuts and fills that I've done on the Oregon Joint Line. So it's kind of I guess there's some universal truths to railroad engineering that there's an inexpensive way to do it, and what's railroads will always lean towards that they won't build a major viaduct when a cut and a culvert will get you there.
Yeah, they're going to go for economics, not necessarily what's pretty and what we want as model railroaders to see, big structures and whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, Dean, I appreciate you being on Around the Layout. It was excellent to hear about your Oregon Joint Line, and looking forward again to get down to Texas and getting to see your layout in person. I'm looking forward to getting some of this out. We'll post some pictures up on the Facebook page for those that are listening to go back and take a look at. And again, October 2021 issue of Railroad Model Craftsman, the one I will say is really the leading magazine in the industry right now. Otto and his team are doing a fantastic job with that, and you certainly did an excellent job providing this article to them on your layout. And I recommend everybody go take a look at that. So again, Dean, thanks for being on Around the Layout.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ray. It was enjoyable to talk to you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.